Wrestle Magic Pod, official sponsors of British Empire Wrestling.
All right, everyone. Tonight's episode of Wrestle Magic, we're having a very special interview because tonight we are interviewing Mr. Eric Young, somebody who has been a TNA mainstay and somebody who he was one of the reasons that I stayed interested in wrestling when I was starting to kind of think that I was growing out of it. Guys like him, guys like Jay Lethal, all kinds of talents that were in TNA helped keep me interested and say, you know what, it's worth watching still. So, Mr. Young, how are you doing? What's going on in your life currently, man?
Me and Jay Lethal, those are two good reasons to stick around. I'm 46 and I've never grown out of it, man. So you're never too old to enjoy something that you like.
Definitely hear that. But yeah, man. So what's going on with you currently? You know, you doing all right?
Yeah, doing good. We were just talking a little bit before we started recording. Got a lot of first world real life problems going on in my house with a burst pipe in my living room. So I currently have no living room, and there's water damage. I'm dealing with that and insurance stuff with my truck. But it's all good, man. Life is good.
Glad to see, even despite all the negative things that are going on, you're still keeping a positive attitude and still wanting to keep going. You know, that's good to see, at least.
Yeah, that stuff happens and it'll never not happen. My dad told me this when I was very young, and I've got the word change tattooed underneath my arm to remind myself is the only guarantee in life is things are going to change, and bad stuff will change to good. Good stuff sometimes changes to bad. Maybe it'll be really good. Maybe it'll be really bad. But it's the only thing in life that's guaranteed is things will change. So hopeful that things will change for the better, and they will. It's just small little first world problems, but nobody's immune to it. Not even us people that are wrestling on TV and are financially stable and all that other stuff. And I still got to pick up my dog's poop and cut my grass and do all kinds of regular stuff that everyone else has to as well.
Absolutely. Life still moves forward. Just because you're on TV, it doesn't necessarily, negate everything else.
That's very true.
Definitely. But all right, so let's jump right into the interview. So something that we like to ask here at Wrestle Magic. So what was your childhood like? Who were you before you were this star on TV?
Yeah, I had an excellent childhood. My mom and my dad made sure that I didn't come from a ton of money. You know, I mean, we never really went without. But not like my family wasn't wealthy or anything like that. I lived in a tiny little town in southwestern Ontario, Canada, population of about 60 people, no traffic light, one store. The store was the grocery store, the video store, the post office, and the restaurant. Closest McDonald's was like a 35-minute drive. Closest traffic light was a 20-minute drive. Yeah, I grew up in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, and I had an amazing childhood. I was basically left to my own devices to kind of do anything I wanted. The fact that I'm still alive is pretty wild. I owned a three-wheeler from the time I was 3 years old and was didn't have a lot of rules other than be good to people, don't hurt anybody, and try to be a good person. When it gets dark, try to come home. So it was a pretty wild childhood, a good childhood. But yeah, didn't have a lot of exposure to television. Like still where I live, there isn't cable television. Obviously, there's satellites now and streaming and all that stuff, but none of that existed when I was a kid. So we had an antenna in our front yard, and I had like 8 or 9 channels. Most of them were from Detroit. That was the closest big city. So grew up watching American television mostly, and sometimes we would get wrestling on Saturday mornings, but if I wanted to find wrestling, it was hard for me. But I dug hard and dug deep and watched it as much as I could.
Absolutely. So you mentioned about watching American television. I sometimes forget that you're Canadian, and I believe you're the first Canadian wrestler that we've had on the show. So, hey, thanks for being here first with that.
There's a long list of us. We've infiltrated pro wrestling, something in the water in Canada. Lots of amazing wrestlers have came from Canada, especially Ontario. So, yeah, it's I was where I was born and raised. I had no say in it. That's just kind of what happened. But I've lived in the United States since 2004. I'm an American citizen now, have an American passport, married to an American woman. This is my home. This is where I choose to live. I could live wherever I want because I travel for work. So, but live in Nashville, Tennessee, and love it here.
Oh, nice. Nashville. A lot of friends of mine live around the Memphis area, and, you know, some people that have been on the show especially have been either around there or lived around there for a while. So, yeah, Memphis, Nashville, there's a lot of great wrestling history all around Tennessee just because you got guys like Yeah, exactly. Like Jerry Lawler and, everybody else that's been there, Eddie Gilbert, anybody that's been through the Memphis territory, has been all around Tennessee. But now I do want to ask you, so what company were you mainly watching when you were able to get into wrestling? And how old were you, do you think, when you started to watch?
Probably around 5 when I, maybe 4 or 5 when I started watching. But like I said, like it was really hit and miss on when I would watch it. And a lot of, from that age to the age of, probably 15, a lot of it was through VHS tapes and renting videotapes and stuff like that. Like we would get like WWF superstars at like 2 a.m. So I would either set a tape to record it when I was young because I couldn't stay up that late. And as I got older, I would stay up to watch it, but like, fighting to stay awake. And it was just a clip show. It was nothing, it was nothing really good, but it didn't matter that, it was wrestling and I got to watch that. And my dad would take me to a local bar that he frequented and they would show the pay-per-view. So I have memories of being in a place where there's all these old construction workers smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, and me and maybe 4 or 5 other kids sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of this big projector screen TV, watching the pay-per-views and people cheering for Hacksaw when he'd come out. And there's no windows in the place. Probably not a place for a 6 or 7, 8-year-old kid, but that was my only really way to watch wrestling. So I was thankful that he let me go, and that was like my gateway into it.
Hey, that's valid. And I kind of like that, even though it's not the best place necessarily for a kid, it seems like it was well taken care of and you guys were at least treated well with it. Like, hey, there's something for them to do. They're not just sitting here in the bar by themselves for no reason, Yeah.
It wasn't like I was my dad's drinking buddy or anything. I'd get a basket of chicken fingers and a Pepsi and sit cross-legged on the front with a few other people. And we would watch the whole pay-per-view.
5 to 7 years old, that sounds like heaven right there. Even up to like 13, probably. That sounds great, honestly. But now I wonder, so who were some of your favorites from that time?
That era, I mean, I love Macho Man. Just like was obsessed with him. I think I always like enjoyed Hulk because of the position he was in. He was the big star and the champion. So when you're a little kid, that's, always part of it. I love Mr. Perfect. I love the Heart Foundation, the Rockers, Power and Glory. Like I just kind of liked everyone. It didn't matter, good guy, bad guy. I didn't really worry about that. Just if there was something interesting about you or I thought you were good at what you did, I liked them. Like obviously, like, I didn't like, John Tenta because he was fat, or I didn't like the $1 Million Man because he was mean, because those are the people they didn't want you to like, and hated Bobby Heenan and all the managers when I was a little kid. But yeah, I mean, I loved everyone and just the larger than life characters and the personas and just getting lost in that when, at that age and just fell in love with it. And then probably around, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, I started playing a lot more hockey and people were growing out of it at that age. So I kind of like slipped away from it. I followed it like a little bit casually. And then probably when I was around 14 or 15, my next door neighbor was obsessed with wrestling still, and still one of my best friends to this day. And he got me more interested in it again. And we started, trading tapes on the internet with people, which is wild. And that we saved up money, and me, him, and another friend of mine went 3 ways and bought a little satellite and paid for like a subscription so we could watch Monday Night Raw and Nitro. And then like once that happened, that was it for me, man. I was obsessed. I couldn't think about it enough, read about it enough, watch it enough. Like it consumed me. It was, and I've said this in other interviews, and it's the truth. It was outside of my family. It was the first thing that I fell in love with. And when I say love, like I mean obsessively in love, probably in an unsafe, unhealthy level. But I think that is the reason I'm sitting here today, because it was pro wrestling or nothing for me. Once I hit the age of about 14 or 15, I just couldn't think about anything else really. Like I did all kinds of other stuff, but nothing else interested me like pro wrestling did.
Hey, that's valid, man. And something that I've started to kind of believe in now that I'm, kind of in my own career and everything, I'm starting to believe that the more you put love into something, the more it's going to give it back to you one way or another. Yep. And it's a beautiful thing to finally receive some of it back. So when did you begin training and decide, you know what, this is it for me? I'm ready to become a wrestler. Let's do this.
Yeah, I started backyard wrestling with my friends, and it started like I had a trampoline, and it started as that when we were really young, and then as we got older, a friend of my dad's was a welder, and I convinced him to weld pipes on the side of it. And we had ropes and we had turnbuckles, and we put mattress and plywood underneath of it so it wouldn't bounce all over the place, and it made it harder and it made it really loud. And we started doing shows at like our local Optimus Club to raise money for the Optimus Club. And my first time wrestling in front of a crowd, there was maybe 12 people in the crowd, and that was it. That was it. There was just nothing else I was going to do with my life. My life was going to be dedicated to doing that every day if I could. Then I got out of high school, and right out of high school, I think it was 13 days after I graduated, I was at a pro wrestling school in Cambridge, Ontario, and started my wrestling career.
Okay. So you were in Cambridge, Ontario. Who was the main trainer? Was that, I think I read something about this on the Wikipedia page.
Waldo Von Erich was the guy that he was older. He couldn't get in the ring anymore, but he worked for Vince McMahon Sr., and he wrestled in the WWF. And I'm pretty sure he still holds the record for the longest match in Madison Square Garden history against Bruno Sammartino. I think it was 97 minutes.
Wow.
Which is insane. And, but yeah, he was born and raised in Canada, and then he moved all over the place because wrestling was still territorial. Or he went to Mexico, and he went to California, and went to Texas, and wasn't a Von Erich, wasn't any relation to them, but was Waldo Von Erich. If you look him up, had a really prestigious career. So he did that, and then Carl LeDuc, which was the nephew of Joe LeDuc. Joe LeDuc and Paul LeDuc were the Canadian Lumberjacks, super famous Canadian tag team. And Paul LeDuc was his father, so Carl was his son. Carl, if you've ever watched Bret Hart Wrestling with Shadows, the documentary, there's a scene where Stu is stretching this bald French guy, and he's like bending his arm over his back, and he's screaming. That's the guy that trained me, did most of the in-ring stuff. So he lived at the Hart house for, I think, 3 years. And then after leaving there, the Harts kind of closed the dungeon in Calgary, and they weren't really running a school there anymore. And then he moved to Cambridge, Ontario, and became the head trainer at the school there.
Okay. So what was it like originally when you stepped in? Like, what was your early days like? Was it a lot of physical conditioning, or what were they having you do?
Yeah, it was half and half. We would do some amateur wrestling to warm up. And at that point in wrestling, they still wanted you to have like kind of this real background. And I had no exposure to that, in case someone started taking liberties with you, so you would know some things and how to protect yourself. And because the wrestling was still very much like that then. And you do that, and it was upstairs above this apartment, and which is crazy. And we'd run the stairs, and we do, crunches and Hindu squats and all kinds of stuff just for conditioning and warming up and stuff. And they wouldn't even let you get in the ring. You had to learn to lock up and do chain wrestling on the floor and earn to get in the ring. It was a big deal. But I can remember just kind of being able to do a lot of it because of backyard wrestling before I got there. But it was the first time in my life that there was something that I liked and I was good at it right away. My first day, I was just as good or better than anyone that had been there. Some of the guys had been there for a year, and I was just as good or better than them right away. And that's no slight on them, but it was just for me. I had never experienced that. Anything else I had done, and I always really had to work at getting better at it, or it took me time to develop skills in hockey or rugby or soccer or all of those sports that I played. But wrestling was something I took to it instantly. You could show me and explain it once, and I could do it. And the truth is, I could probably do it better than they even thought I could right away. So at the time, you were allowed to get Monday through Friday, you were allowed to train, and you could get in the ring at 6, and you had to be out of the ring at 10. So at 6 o'clock, I'd be in there, and at 10 o'clock, they'd have to come and get me and tell me, all right, get out. You're not allowed. There's an apartment beside us. You can't be in here taking bumps because these people got to go to work tomorrow. So, and I trained Monday through Friday, and then a lot of people would go home on the weekends. I would stay and wrestle on Saturday and Sunday as well because they'd have open ring and you could do whatever you want. So was obsessed, just completely obsessed with training and learning. I wanted to be able to do every move and take every move and over the ropes frontwards and backwards and through the ropes frontwards and backwards and over the corner and back body drops and suplexes and power bombs. I wanted to do everything. Someone's like, hey, does someone want to take this move I'm trying to learn? Yep, I'd be the first person I slide in. They'd have no idea. And couple injuries here and there, but I mostly came out of it unscathed. But I just was obsessed, man. I was obsessed with it. And I think it was this high of being good at something right away was something I had never experienced. And it was just like this drug. Like I was like, well, man, like I was good at it, but I just couldn't learn enough. And the more I would learn, the more it would open up to learn other things. So yeah, I was just completely obsessed with it, man. And for probably a year and a half, like I was there every day, every day, hundreds and thousands of bumps and hundreds and thousands of matches and called matches. And, on the weekend, I'd be like, oh, let's do an Ironman match. We'd set up, a clock in the corner and try to wrestle for 60 minutes. And it's tough when you only know how to do 10 or 12 things. But that time in my life was super exciting. I was young. I was starting my journey doing this thing that I was obsessed with and loved, and like just nothing else existed. I still had a job and had to pay bills and buy food and do my laundry and stuff, but all that stuff was just in service of being able to go to training that night. And started working out religiously and working on my conditioning and working on getting stronger and, building up my body to take punishment and look like a pro wrestler. And it was all important to me. And I just couldn't, never felt like work. It just felt like this mission I was on. I was going to accomplish it one way or the other, and no one was going to stop me.
Hey, man, you become determined enough, then that just becomes your calling at that point. And it sounds like you really were driven from the beginning, and that's not something that's really teachable. And that's something that a lot of coaches really love to look for, is just somebody who just wants it bad enough. So now I am wondering, how exactly were your original trainers with you? Did you like them? Did you feel like they were really good with you? Did you think they could have done better? What did you think?
Yeah, great. And I did a ton of stuff with Scott Demore at that time, and he was doing shows and was kind of affiliated with the school that I was at, and he didn't really have a school at that time, which is why I didn't go to Scott's school, because he didn't have one. But meeting him and, helping him, set up shows, and I'd, set up chairs and I do music for him. I'd set up the ring and I do whatever, just to be around it, because I wanted to learn not just wrestling. I wanted to learn all of it, because all of it is all encompassing. And if you understand how a show is put together, and you understand, how to draw people to a show, or, create interest in a show, like that can only benefit you. So that, and Chris Canyon was filming the Jesse Ventura movie. So I spent, probably 4 or 5 months training with him and being around him kind of every day. And then there was some experienced wrestlers like Mark Bartolucci, Steve Kerdikis, Tyson Dukes. These guys were guys that were wrestling in Ontario before me, and they would come to this gym, and just being around them. And Carl was great, and like comes from a wrestling family. It's in his blood. Kind of a wild guy, like just a really wild character, but was a really good trainer and taught, the details. Waldo's take was, it was dated. He looked at it through a lens from the 60s still, but there was lots of things that he said that still apply today. And tons of like little details of like, really exaggerating movements so the people in the front row and the people in the nosebleeds can understand what you're doing. Because the people in the nosebleeds, they bought tickets too. And if you're doing these kind of small, kind of, minute movements, they can't understand because they're too far away. And that's a very old school way of looking at wrestling. But I think it helped, and just I think they saw potential in me too. So they would go the extra mile. And I guess I was not a teacher's pet in any way, but I was definitely, one of the favorite people there. And I was willing to work with guys on their first day and, take power slams from people who have never done it before, because, I thought I could help them. And plus if I can learn to take a power slam from a person that doesn't even know how to do it, then I can take a power slam from anyone. So that was part of the reward for me. So yeah, my training was great, and my exposure to it at that point was excellent.
Okay. Okay, sounds like you had a great time, coming up in the business, starting off, you're getting yourself in shape, you're really learning from some experienced guys. And Waldo, wasn't his character like portrayed as a Nazi? I'm not going to say Waldo himself was a
Yes.
Nazi, but yeah, he played
Yes.
a Nazi
No, he
character.
certainly wasn't a Nazi. Yeah. I mean, he has a German background. I think his last name was Cyber. So he had a German background. He looked German. But yeah, that's, he's wrestling Bruno Sammartino, this big Italian guy from New York City, dressed as a Nazi soldier, and this is when, I don't care what you say, half the people in the crowd thought he was a Nazi, and they tried to kill him, and tried to stab him. The World War II is far from over at that point, but it still was real to them. He wore like the uniform and the duck boots. Like, I mean, obviously you couldn't get away with that now. But at that point, it was, he said it was like taking candy from a baby. People like he would always tell this story from him, and when him and Bruno worked in that 97 match, he said they didn't physically touch for like the first 22 minutes.
Wow.
Can you imagine a wrestling match that was 22 minutes long and they hadn't touched? Like, those guys would be crucified nowadays. But back then, it just, the crowd was at such a fever pitch. They didn't have to do anything. So he would like circle, and Bruno would come in to get him, and then he'd back up and he'd do like the Nazi thing, and he'd like duck walk around, and like people wanted to kill him, like for real wanted to kill him. And, yeah, wild stuff. He told a story. Someone stabbed him with scissors one time, and he'd have to park like blocks away. And then Vince McMahon Sr. would give the ambulance extra money to go pick him up, and he would hide in the back of the ambulance to get into the building because he couldn't just walk in like the other guys, because the people would try to kill him, like for real, try to kill him. And yeah, wild stuff, man, wild.
It's amazing looking back at history and seeing, like, I believe there's news reports about like people wanting to shoot Lawler and shoot the Iron Sheik at different times. And it's amazing how much heat can you possibly generate today to even come close to that? I don't think anybody really can.
You can't. And the truth is like, it's like anything, is wrestling has just evolved, and the fan base has evolved, and the curtain has been pulled, kind of all the way back. And I think there's lots of good comes from that. I think like the WWE show where they're showing like the booking meetings and stuff, like the truth is they're showing these hundreds and thousands of hours a year are people like thinking about this thing in painstaking detail, and the amount of work that goes into putting these shows together and deciding who does what and when it happens. And like, it's just endless. And, guys that are writing the show and running the show, like someone like Triple H, like there are no days off for him. He works 100 hours a week plus, or more. And that's not exaggerated. I'm telling you, he works no less than 80 hours a week, no less. And the truth is it just kind of never ends, because there is no off season. He gets done Raw, and okay, Raw is great. Well, now what are we doing for SmackDown? What are we doing for the pay-per-view? What are we doing for next week? And that never ends. And it's just this endless cycle of making content and putting stuff out. And it's evolved into this other thing, and the fans being in on how it works, and are aware that it's predetermined and stuff. But I think even the hardcore fans, they still want you to blur the lines. They want you to make them forget that it is predetermined. They want to feel like it's real. And I think you should always work towards that. That should be your first goal, is to make it feel as real or as emotional as possible, because that's what connects people to it, is emotion. So yeah, it's like anything. I mean, it worked back then, and what works back then doesn't work now. And the level of athleticism now, like, I always joke about it. I think, a lot of the guys from the 80s, like if they started training now, they would never get hired, because none of them were good enough athletes. Someone like Hulk Hogan, who's maybe the greatest pro wrestler of all time. His story is complicated. And for me, it's complicated. He was always good to me and complimentary of me. But the truth is the truth. And he did a lot of wild stuff and said a lot of wild stuff. but was never like a great athlete. He was just kind of this big guy with big muscles. And I don't know if he would have been athletic enough to make it in wrestling today, is the truth, Yeah. And I consider myself a very good athlete, and comparatively to people like, Leon Slater and, Cedric Alexander and Will Ospreay and, guys like this, like I'm a slug comparatively. So it's wild how it evolves and changes. And it's kind of a beautiful thing about wrestling too, is it does evolve and change. And what we're doing now in 5 years, we won't be doing what we're doing now. We'll be doing something else.
That's very true, but I disagree with you that you're like a slug in comparison. Man, you've still got a very good move set, and you move pretty well. I've always thought that you were a very good technical wrestler.
I move fine for someone who's been doing it as long as I can, or I have. And like I said, I've always been a guy. I think, I played rugby in high school. I think if I really worked at it, I may have been able to play professional rugby. Was always a good athlete, and I've been able to keep up. Like I wrestled Leon, a couple pay-per-views ago, and he's young enough to be my son. And that was 26 minutes. And I think some people, I'm not saying this, I have read it, some people are saying it could be in the voting of match of the year. And that's not too bad for someone who's 46, wrestling someone who's young enough to be his son. So it's, the minute I feel I can't do it, I'll retire. And, that could be tomorrow. I don't think it will be, but, wrestling just evolves, and I just keep trying to evolve with it. I stick to what I believe and what I think good wrestling is and what I believe is important, and that will never change. But wrestling is constantly changing. The target of what's good is constantly moving. So always trying to strive for that and changing what you do to fit what the audience is looking for now has always been prevalent.
Right. Totally agree. It is always evolving. Now, something that you had mentioned was Hulk Hogan may not have been able to compete in today's wrestling scene. And I will agree with that because, well, he was a big guy. He could move a little bit. Like, I will say that I believe his best match was against the Great Muta in Japan. I think that one was his best, and I think that was, something that a lot of people haven't seen as often, whereas most people are like remembering, the Andre slam at Mania. Sure. I get it. That's a pretty big moment. But I do believe that his better matches were things like against Muta. But with that, I do want to say, do you think with everything with the steroids and everything, do you think that's also a factor? Because, I mean, let's be real. He admitted it even in his documentary that, he did steroids at some point. And realistically, without that, would he have been as big? Not to say that he may not have been as determined to lift and get himself that big, but obviously the steroids were definitely a big, booster at the time.
Yeah, I think it was pretty prevalent in the business, in the world at that point, in sports, certainly in pro wrestling, was definitely a thing that was not talked about, but it was everywhere. It was almost part of the business, at that point. So, I don't think that has anything to do with could he do it or couldn't he do it. Like, the match against Muta, it obviously is awesome. And like I'm not taking, like, he's one of the best to ever do it. Him versus Rock at WrestleMania 18, I think it was, is a masterpiece. It's a little masterpiece. And that's when people were like, oh, he's so old and he can't do anything. I mean, he had people, I was there live, and like he had people just eating out of his hand, like completely eating out of his hand, and completely takes over the matches calling. And they probably had a very different match in mind. And Canadians said, we don't care. It's Hulk Hogan and we're going to cheer him. Like, I think he ran Rock over with a truck and hit him in the head with a sledgehammer. They did everything they could to make Hogan the bad guy. And Canadians were just like, nope, that's Hulk Hogan and we're cheering for him. And it was completely called. And I believe both of them just showed what two pros putting in an environment like that, with energy like that, are capable of. And it was a masterpiece.
Absolutely, totally agree. However, the interview is more about you than Hogan. I know we could talk wrestling all day and probably go back and forth like crazy, but I definitely want to shift the focus back on you. So what was it like when getting ready to leave wrestling school? Is there like a big moment where they're like, hey man, we think you're ready to go out, I've contacted these agents, so you got to show this next week, or how does it work?
Oh, it was very different then. This is 1997, 1998. So like the internet exists, but nothing like it is now. People don't have cell phones. There is no MySpace or Facebook or social media. There's none of that. It's all just word of mouth. And, I got booked on this show, then this guy saw me, and then he's got a show, and I call this guy at his house. Hey, my name's Eric Young and I'm a wrestler. Could I get on your show? And I'm interrupting his dinner. It was a completely different world, but you just network and you start meeting other people. And then, you get on a show and this other guy's on a different show and he tells the promoter, oh, you should book this guy. And it's just kind of how it happens. And it still happens that way now. Like, it's much easier to get your name out through social media now. It's an amazing tool for young wrestlers. And I tell them I'm not a massive fan of social media, but the amazing thing about it is it's free for all of us to use. And it is an amazing tool for getting your work out there, getting your name out there, promos and matches and stuff like that wasn't available to me. Like, if I wrestled in Toronto, everybody in the crowd, that was the first time ever seeing me, and none of them knew who I was or what I was about. And you had to start from scratch. So, again, how it's evolved and stuff. But back then it was just, it started slow. It was like, one show a month, and then it was 2 shows a month, and it was 4 shows a month. And then it just balloons and picks up pace. And now I'm wrestling in Ontario, and I'm wrestling in New York, and I'm wrestling in Indiana and Michigan, and I'm wrestling in Ohio. And then, I get a call to go with a group of guys out east. And then I get a call, we're going to go to New York and wrestle on these 2 shows and come with us. And we pile into a van and drive down there. So just, it was a very different way of doing it then, but, I figured it out slowly. Like, when I first started traveling, I had paper maps in my car. I don't even know if you're even old enough to know what that is, but that's how you got around. That's how you got around. There was no GPS. There was no MapQuest, or you had a paper map and you looked at the, okay, and we take Highway 10, and then when we get on this end, and then we'll pull off, and you'd go to a show and you wouldn't even know where the show was. Like, you wouldn't even have an address. You just pull into the town and like stop at the gas station and say, hey, like, where's the wrestling show today? And like, oh, I think I saw a poster for that. I think it's at the Legion, and it's down the road, and go down here and turn left and then turn right, and you would hopefully find it. So it was just a wild way to live. But I look at that point in my life as like the best time of my life. I was just having so much fun, making no money and sleeping in my car and eating 10 cans of tuna a day because I couldn't afford anything else, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
I mean, it seems like a really good time at that point, because you're young, you're pretty resilient at that point. So you don't really need that much sleep. You're just getting a few hours here and there, driving to your next city, getting into another booking, hoping that you found the right place. And you had said that you're not sure if I'm old enough to know about, old paper maps and everything. I was born in 98, so that was still a remnant at that point.
They were still around. I think they're still around. They don't have them at gas stations and stuff like they used to because no one needs them. But I think you could probably still find some paper maps somewhere.
Oh, you definitely can. And it was just funny, hearing that, because there is a lot of stuff that I did miss out on, obviously, because, I'm a little bit younger. But yeah, it is kind of funny seeing, bringing it up that, I never really had to experience dealing with that myself, but I do remember seeing it occasionally come out when it's like, hey, where are we? Give me a minute. Everybody's looking through everything.
The map.
Exactly. But all right. So you're, bouncing around between the indies. So when exactly did you end up working for TNA, or maybe there was another company that you might ended up working for first? Where did you find your big break?
Yeah. So I started, I was wrestling independently, kind of all over the place. I was one of the kind of like main guys in Ontario. And at one point, I think I held 13 different like heavyweight titles or world titles or whatever you want to call them for a bunch of different promotions. Jeez. Which is wild to say, but I was crazy busy and kind of wrestling all over the place and really getting my name out there and building a reputation. Obviously working for Scott D'Amore. He had really great independent shows in Windsor called BCW, and he'd bring in big names and there'd be big crowds, and he had some of the best shows anywhere outside of, for independent wrestling. And then he was working for TNA Wrestling, and I had gone down, I think drove down once with my friend. He had a tryout. I didn't get on, but I met some people. And then I had wrestled, I think, a couple tryout matches there. I did a 6-man tag and another like 4-way match. And then the Team Canada thing kind of came up, and I had troubles getting across the border, and there's a big, long, crazy story that we don't need to get into. But I ended up kind of marrying a complete stranger and moving to Nashville to make it easy for them to hire me. I owned a house in Ontario. I had a good job. I ran a wrestling school. I quit my job, closed my wrestling school, sold my half of the house to my other friend for $1. Packed my clothes and my wrestling stuff in my car and drove down to Nashville and went to the court on this girl's lunch break. It's past the time. I can't get in trouble for it anymore. But we got married on her lunch break, which is wild. And I think it was probably about 3 or 4 weeks after that, signed my first deal with TNA to do the World X Cup. And that was for 4 shows. And Team Canada was only going to be booked on the World X Cup, and we were going to do those 4 shows. And that was it. But we ended up gelling so well as a team. And obviously, Johnny Devine, Bobby Roode, Petey Williams, Scott, this foundational talent for what TNA becomes in the later years. But they didn't know that at the time. And something just clicked, and we had really good heat, and people hated our guts. Obviously the talent was there, but they didn't know that. And then after World X Cup, we all signed full-time deals to keep Team Canada around, to be a kind of a full-time faction on the show. So in the dark and at the fairgrounds, I signed my first contract in the dark. I didn't even read it for 4 days. And then I think it was probably 2 or 3 days after the finals of the World X Cup, we were backstage, and they said, they kind of announced that they were going to sign us all. And me and Bobby Roode, I think he turned around and I signed mine on his back, and I turned around and he signed his on my back. We didn't even read them. And we went back to work and, putting the match together or whatever we were doing that day. But that was the first day where I could say I accomplished my goal. My only goal getting into wrestling was to say I signed a contract so I could tell people that this was my job. And I had never said it before that because it wasn't my job. I had a regular job and to pay for my wrestling hobby on the weekends. And then so that was whatever that would have been, May of 2004, maybe. I'm bad with dates, but I think it's around that time. And worked there for 12 straight years. So not bad.
Yeah, I'll agree. And I do want to ask about, because I watched a few of your matches before hopping on with you, and I wanted to try to get at least a little bit of a feel for different eras that you had been wrestling. And one of them, I saw you and Scott D'Amore coming out, and it was going to be against Sting. And, you guys had Team Canada flag and everything, and immediately you acted scared of the pyro and everything. Whose idea was that? Because that became something that it seemed to happen a good amount of times. So whose idea was that? Where did that come from?
Yeah. So I had been asking them for months, just, give me a gimmick, like a character. My gimmick was that I didn't speak. I was on TV for 2 years. I hadn't said a single word on camera. Jeez. And, which is wild to think about. And my gimmick is that I was from Canada. That sucks. It's not very good. And in that Team Canada kind of had run its course. Everyone was kind of transitioning into their own thing, and I wanted my own thing. And I think it was Dutch Mantell had done a similar gimmick with Savio Vega in Puerto Rico, and he said, you're paranoid and you're kind of wild and you're scared you're getting fired and you're worried and I just kind of took the scared thing and really amplified it to the point where I was worried about getting fired, but it was just because I was neurotic about being scared. And I had never done comedy wrestling ever a day in my life before that, and just kind of fell into it, but had a lot of fun doing it. I got Sting as one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I wrestled him I think it was his first match in 5 or 10 years. It was his first time he had wrestled on TV, and I got to work him, which was super cool. But yeah, just kind of took what they gave me and ran with it. I don't know if you've ever been in a building where pyro goes off. They don't really use that much anymore, except for WrestleMania and big shows. But at that point in wrestling, on every Nitro, on every Monday Night Raw, on every TNA, there was pyrotechnics for whatever reason. And if you've ever been in a building where they set them off, it's terrifying. It's so loud. And I just thought, if a person is actually scared of everything, these explosions going off would give them a heart attack. So it was kind of a fun thing where I the pyro guy, I would just tell him, there's no cue. You just shoot it off whenever you feel is right. So they would do it at different times. Like sometimes I'd wait and I'd look back and it wouldn't go. And then like, oh, the coast is clear. And then I'd take 2 or 3 steps and then it would go off and I'd fall down and like hold my heart. So it was all part of storytelling for me. Like, if I was scared, if I was truly scared of everything, it was like, I couldn't do it in a promo and then the bell rings and I start power bombing the guy. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I just took it and went to the 1,000th degree, because I think that's what good pro wrestling is. It's just the volume needs to be turned all the way up in whatever it is. And so that's what I did.
Absolutely. Crank it up to 11. I believe
Yep.
when I had Chavo on the show, and this is probably one of the first interviews I ever did, but I had asked him about, what inspires his character. And he said, well, most great characters are kind of just a personality and then crank it up to 11, just go to a next level with it. So I can definitely see what you mean. And I think it kind of intertwines with that. But so I remember as a kid, I eventually got the TNA video game. And this is one thing I really wanted to ask about. Do you remember what your line was in the main story of the game?
With the tag team, we were Salty Biscuits.
Something like that,
Salty Biscuits, something like that. And there was a bunch of stuff from that. I spent like a week in LA doing the voiceover and stuff for that, which was super cool for me. Like being in a video game was surreal, where I didn't have to create myself. Like I was, and being part, one of the main parts of the story mode, which is super cool. I mean, it was like a bucket list kind of thing. Like, not that I had that on my bucket list, but that's like if I was to write a bucket list, that would have been on there, be in a video game. So it's that was a wild time. And the game was never really well received, and it wasn't fully finished when they put it out, but it's had like this resurgence in the last couple of years. People saying it was really fun and they loved playing it. And I think if they would have been able to finish it fully, I think it could have been one of the best wrestling games made.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I really enjoyed it as a kid. And the line that I was talking about was when they introduce your character into it, you've got somebody's talking to the character that you create for the story mode. And he's like, yeah, you really need somebody, a tag team partner, somebody to have your back. And then it's like a slow camera is like scaling up your body, like as you're walking down the hallway. And then all you hear all of a sudden from the corner where you walk in is, you smell like bananas. And it's just the weirdest.
Okay, yeah, that's right. It's the weirdest thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. And doing that, like recording that stuff with no context, like they're not showing me the video. Like you're just in the sound booth and like there's just a page and you're just reading it and they're like, say it more like this, and okay. No context of where it's going to go or what's going to happen. But yeah, it was wild. And people like remember all that stuff and remember like when you make a character and then like I become your tag partner and like your mentor or whatever. And, it's a really cool position to be in, man. It's a super cool part of my wrestling story.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought it was cool to see that they were, in a way, giving you that push and pushing popularity on you, because you definitely deserved it. You've always been great in the ring, and your character, you put a lot of work into that from how I perceived it. It felt like you were constantly doing your best to still be a comedy guy, and it always just kind of worked out. Did you have any kind of inspirations outside of what you had already mentioned to try to be a great comedy wrestler? Because you held that gimmick for a long time.
Yeah, no, I did. No, there was no real inspiration to it. I love that creative process of, for lack of a better word, is manipulating people to believe that that's who I am. I'm clearly not that person. I wasn't that person 2 years prior when I was in Team Canada. Like I got hired by TNA because I was a good wrestler. I have no paranoia. I don't have stress. I don't worry about really anything and never have. So that's a massive stretch for me. But for me, the goal was to make people believe that I was that person all the time, all the time. And it had a really interesting creative process to it. Like I love improv. I took, drama all through high school, did improv Olympics where me and people from the school would travel to other schools and be in these competitions. I love watching improv comedy shows. And a lot of the stuff that you saw during that time, that 8 or 9 years, was, especially after they realized that I was pretty good at it, they wouldn't even write anything for me. It would just be like, Eric Young shows up and does his thing, so I would just come into a promo and say whatever I wanted and do whatever I wanted. And that's a drug too, that kind of responsibility, and where that kind of trust, where they know that I'm going to deliver, in that way, and trusting and not micromanaging me and saying, how to do you best. So just do what you do. And then, obviously it's, not what I was dreaming about, sitting cross-legged at that bar with my dad. I didn't want to be the mentally challenged guy on TV. That wasn't what I was dreaming about, but it was a really unique role. That was the role that was open and available to me at the time. So I took it and ran with it. And the truth is like a lot of people, like I talk to people at meet and greets and at indie shows now and at meet and greets for TNA and stuff. And a lot of the people's really fond memories of my career is from that time. And I loved it. It was so fun. There was no pressure. And part of the reason I think why I'm not too beaten up and I'm able to still work and be physical at 46 is I had 8 or 9 years off. I was being paid like I was a full-time wrestler. I was on every show. I was a very popular performer on the roster, sold a ton of t-shirts, sold a ton of meet and greets and autographs and 8x10s and all that stuff. But I wanted to wrestle and do more. But that wasn't my role. They had AJ and they had Joe and they had Frankie and they had Daniels and they had Bobby Reed. So this other thing is what was available to me. So that's what I did. And the truth is I got a TV show out of it and was able to make another whole job, another whole occupation of hosting shows and being on television in another light stems from that. And if I was just a wrestler, those doors would have never opened for me. So it's something I tell young guys if they ask for advice. I just say, unless it's really against something that you believe morally, or something that that's you're very against religiously or whatever, don't say no. Don't ever say no, because you don't know where it's going to lead.
That's very true. Unless there's an absolute I can't do this for whatever reason, go with it. Try to play it out. See how it works out for you. 100%. So something else that I do want to ask you about now, because that's not the only gimmick that you've played at this point. Now, at this point in time, I do believe that you're still in the Maniac gimmick that you're in. How did you feel about transitioning from being kind of, I don't want to say schizophrenic, because that's definitely not the right word, but, paranoid, I should say, to this Maniac sort of thing? How did you feel about the transition? Yeah,
I think there's tons of layers in between the two. Right. There's scared Eric Young. Then there's goofy Eric Young. Yeah. Then there's super Eric, for a brief amount of time. Then there's kind of regular Eric, and then frontline, which is, a bunch of us young guys. Then there's World Elite, where I'm wearing suits and I'm the leader of this evil faction, that has all foreigners in it. And then it's me and Kev and in the band. So I was in the NWO for 6 or 8 weeks, so there's all these other things. But the transition is scary at first, because you're are people ever going to believe that I'm another thing? I've been 8 or 9 years beating him over the head that I'm this goofy, kind of crazy, funny, crazy character. If I do this other thing, will they buy in? And I think that just depends on you. If you buy in, I need to believe first. I need to believe that I'm this other thing first to make them believe that I'm this other thing. And I think that I've done that successfully over a bunch of times. And luckily for me is, I've said this before, is I don't think I'm the best talker or the best wrestler or the best comedy guy or the best anything, but I've been able to do kind of all of it at a very high level. And the coolest part for me is I've gotten to wear 10 or 20 different hats. I didn't just do one thing. I've experienced wrestling from every angle possible. And I think there's very few people that have that view of it, because they haven't experienced the full experience of what I've experienced. I've been the opening match. I've been the main event. I've been in tag teams. I've been the goofy, funny guy. I've been the scared weakling that gets beaten up. I've been the jobber guy. I was wrestling women before it was cool. And, so it's, for me, that's the coolest feather in my hat, is that I've seen the card from every angle. And I've been able to produce at a high level in all of those spots as kind of this utility guy. And I've had varying levels of success. Some of it very, very high level success. And others not so much. And some of it is you're a victim of circumstance. The writing team changes and they don't like this, and now you're doing this other thing. That's how wrestling works. But my favorite part of my career is that I've got to do all of these different things because I'm a very experiential person. I want to do everything and go everywhere and see everything and meet different people and eat different food and experience different cultures. And I'm doing that through wrestling. And, I've done all of it. There's very few things that I haven't experienced, and still working away.
Absolutely, man. And I still like your matches to this day because, I've seen one of the recent things that were on YouTube was your match with EC3, where you put him through a table via pile driver off the apron. And all I could think was like, he still got it. This guy, from what I saw on Wikipedia and everything, was like making his debut 2004. That's when I was in kindergarten. To this day,
right? Yeah,
you're still doing these crazy things that look great. And then I saw you were doing a dog collar match with someone else completely. And I'm like, you don't really see these kind of matches very often anymore. So I'm like sitting on my bed and it feels like I'm watching, one of my childhood heroes still performing just the same. And I'm like, he's still here. I don't know how, but he is still just the same, but you've just changed your character. And I think that's very commendable, and you've done it very well. And something that I have seen as well during that was your match with Abyss, the Monsters Ball, when he finally became unmasked and everything. And I thought the storytelling of this match is excellent, even though this is kind of where I feel like TNA started to peak at the time, and then it started to kind of come down after a little bit. I do believe when it switched to blue, that's where it started to get a little funky. But yeah, so I did want to ask you about, so were you at all involved with the creative process for that storyline and that match, and how much input did you have?
Yeah. Well, like obviously me and Abyss are, at that point are two guys that have been around for a long time, him especially. I still think he's one of the best big men ever in the business. He has a mind for wrestling that is like second to none, and just cares about it so much. And me and him are very close and still are to this day. And it was like a real long build to that. Like it was, like almost over a year to get to that, where we were together and he was Joseph Park, and this kind of slow process of him turning back into Abyss. And obviously the Monster Ball, that's a match that he made famous, and that's been his thing. But when I'm put in a position like that, I want to hold my own, and I want to hold up my end of the bargain, make it physical and make it violent and make it physical and make it all the things that a Monsters Ball match needs to be. And we did that. And it's one of my favorite matches in my career. And I think it's so far kind of far away from what I do on a regular basis, but also I've shown I can do that too. And that's part of wrestling, and those kind of hardcore matches with weapons and stuff, that's become part of pro wrestling. And you need to be able to do it because you never know when you're going to find yourself in the middle of that. And having the ultimate dance partner made it awesome for me, a guy that has knows matches like that inside and out and understands wrestling at a top level. So yeah, it's one of my favorite matches I've had in TNA, and I'm glad to have it with him. And he's just such a good dude and a great friend of mine still to this day. And I got to see him a couple weeks ago and have dinner with him, which was super cool. But yeah, something I'm super, super proud of.
Oh, absolutely. As you should be. I think it was a great story, and the ending, especially, even just that one match was like, man, this was awesome. And that's the only way I can really put it. But we are getting a little bit closer to the end of the interview here, and here's where I do like to ask a little bit more generic questions. I know we could go all day with other stuff, but first question that I want to ask you, if you could go back to the beginning of your career and give your young self right before you started training any sort of advice, what would you tell yourself?
I think being an experiential person is I'm not a person that looks back or forward very far. Like I have always prided myself and tried to be a person that's kind of like in the moment. Like the truth is the reason I was a little bit late to the interview is because I was dealing with a bunch of real world stuff and time had just slipped my mind because I'm just in the middle of doing what I'm doing. And like right now, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do after. I'm thinking about doing the interview with you and thinking about your question. So thinking back like that, it would be tough. I think one is just do what you do and trust that it'll work out. Work hard and show up and be a good person and be somebody that people can trust. I think is a big thing. And I think a thing I've learned over time, and I learned this from being around Kevin Nash a bunch and being around Scott and Sean. I learned a ton about how the business works. And sometimes you got to push back and sometimes you got to say no. And I think very early on, I had a hard time with that because I was just so thankful of having my position, having a job and, being employed. And over time, I learned sometimes when you really believe something could be better or something that you don't believe is going to work or something that you're just really against, sometimes you got to say no. And I'm not a person, I don't have a million hills to die on, but there are hills that I'll die on now. And I learned that from working with them and just becoming more experienced. So I would say to my younger self is sometimes you have to learn to say no when it's something that you truly believe. And most of the time, if I say no or I'm resistant to something, it's because I think it can be done in a better way. And it's not an egotistical thing. It's just a thing for the show or for the pay-per-view or for the match or just for the segment or for the storyline. I feel really strongly if we did it this way rather than this way, it will make it better in the long run for everybody. And it's never like out of greed, like, oh, like I'm going to look stupid or, I've never been like that. I'm not programmed that way. Maybe I would be much wealthier and much more famous if I was, but I'm just not programmed that way. But sometimes you got to say no, whether it's something that you adamantly believe is wrong or you adamantly believe that you can change it in a way to make it better. So that would be a piece of advice that I would say.
Okay, I think that's really good advice, honestly. Sometimes you got to stop being the yes man and just wanting to please everybody, and you just got to say no. And
you're never going to please everybody. And that's another thing I probably would say is pro wrestling is art. And there's lots of people that think I'm terrible at it and don't care for what I do. And that's fine. And that's what art is. And it is art. You're just never going to make everybody happy. I stopped trying to make everybody happy a long time ago. I'll tell you, my mental well-being is a lot better because of it.
Yeah, it's probably better off that way. But all right, so next question. If you could book a match with yourself in your prime against anybody from history, and you can put any kind of stipulation on the match as well, you could even rerun a match that you've already done just to experience it again, who would you book yourself against?
I would be Shawn Michaels. And I could have just yelled that as soon as you started the question. The best to ever do it, bell to bell. You can't convince me otherwise. Weirdly became a friend of mine. And a person that I worked with a bunch when I was at NXT, and we still stay in contact every now and then, which is wild. The person that I've idolized since I was a little kid. I wrote for ESPN when I was at NXT. I did some stories, and I'm sure you can find it on the internet because once it's on the internet, it never goes away. But it's an article called it's written by me, and it was actually written by me, and it's called My Love Letter to the Heartbreak Kid. So if you want to understand my deep love for Shawn Michaels and what he means to me, you could read that because that would take up a lot of your time.
Okay.
But that undoubtedly that will never happen. He's retired, and but if I could do any one person, it would be him.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Shawn is one of the best to ever do it, so I can agree with that. But you've already answered what would have been the next question, which would have been, who do you believe is the greatest of all time? But not a big deal on that. I'm glad that you answered. Yep. So next thing I'm going to ask you about. Wrestle Magic. So here at Wrestle Magic, we always like to give recommendations for the audience. It can be anything you want: movies, TV shows, video games, your favorite breed of cat, your favorite cactus variant. I don't care. Just something you think that everybody should try. My friend, what would you recommend?
All right, so I got here's a couple I can throw. One, own a dog, and if you can, own a pit bull because they are the best. I have two of them. I can tell you that no pit bull is born mean. If they're mean or they're bad, then they were taught that by a human being. There are no bad dogs. They don't exist. Only bad owners and bad people. Two, I would say two bands to listen to. Music is a huge part of my life. I have over 2,000 vinyl albums downstairs.
Wow.
Black Pumas. If you've never listened to Black Pumas, they're an incredible R&B band, just incredible music, incredible live, incredible band. And a new band that I just discovered, they're actually from Nashville here, actually become friends of mine, called the Lombardi Band. If you like really cool rock and roll music, there's a huge resurgence in rock and roll music right now in Nashville, I think in the United States in general. But they're called Lombardi Band. Check them out on Spotify, follow them on Instagram, and tell them that Eric Young sent you. They'll get a kick out of that. Also, another band, Us Versus Them. They wrote my new theme music. I was a fan of the band, and they kind of reached out about writing a theme song for me. So the new theme song called The Cleanse was written and produced by a band called Us Versus Them, all one word.
Nice. Okay, I'll definitely check some of that out for sure. So, all right, guys, my recommendation for this week is going to be the video game Diablo 2. They've made a comeback, just having a relaunch, I guess you could call it, or it's the Resurrected Edition, whatever you want to call it, and playing either the original or the Resurrected. It's a lot of fun, just, playing the game. It's something from, I think, like 2002 it was released, and it's still...
Yeah, it's way back. It's a way back game.
Yeah, but it's something that I grew up playing, and recently I've been playing it a little bit more on my Xbox, and I've been, just enjoying it again. I'm into the retro stuff. But
very cool.
Since you mentioned the dogs as well, I'm going to also say I would recommend German or Dutch Shepherds. Great dogs. My family had a mix of both, and
there's no bad dogs. No bad dogs.
Oh, totally agree. But yeah, so with that, next thing that I will ask, sir, do you have any last messages for the audience before we sign off?
Yeah, I'd just say, anybody watching this or hearing this, if you've watched or, bought a ticket to a show of anything that I've done, even if it wasn't just to see me, it was just to go in general, thank you. Like, as sure as I'm sitting here, like this is kind of all I've ever wanted to do with my life, as cheesy as it sounds, but I'm literally living my dream and have been living my dream for over 20 years. And, it paid for my house and paid for all my stuff. I'm certainly not some crazy wealthy person, but I'm very comfortable and very well off. And I feel like I haven't worked in 20 years. So thank you for supporting pro wrestling, the thing that I love probably the most outside of, my family and my wife. And thanks for supporting shows like this. It allows me to get me to run my mouth and talk about cool stuff that I've done. And just thank you in general, man. I'm a very grateful person, and I worked hard and sacrificed a ton, but I don't ever get here by myself through, whether it's people in the business or fans or, all of it. None of us can do it on our own. And I'm thankful for that relationship.
Very nice words, honestly, and I can appreciate that you definitely want to extend gratitude to the fans, because without fans, nobody in entertainment gets anywhere.
Doesn't exist. Wrestling during COVID was weird, man. Glad you guys came back. It was strange.
Yeah, the no crowd shows were always like this.
It was really weird. It was cool to be done at 3:00 in the afternoon, but it was really weird. Man, it was weird.
Totally agree. But all right, guys, so you all know how I like to end the show. So do something nice for somebody. You never know who needs it out there. It could be as simple as, getting your buddy an energy drink before going into work, or maybe you sit down with them and just say, hey, man, you doing all right? And just listen to their problems, and you know what? Just talk to them. Give them a minute, maybe even give them some help if they need help with anything going on in their life. So with that, in the words of my buddy Memphis Mark, we are out.
Wrestle Magic.